We start our movie at a small town in America, and we see Jacob, a minister in a church, and he's teaching how husbands should treat their wives as Jesus treats his church. And after his teaching, Jacob and his wife Anne talk to a local girl Amelia and ask her why her mom has stopped coming to church. And she tells them that her mom has started drinking again and that she's really worried about her. And Jacob tells Amelia that he can come to her house and talk to her mother tomorrow if it's necessary, and Amelia thanks them and leaves. And as Amelia was walking back home, she kept hearing these weird, odd noises. And when she looks, it was just some rats that were running around. And then she starts going faster, but now she starts hearing someone call her name. And it was a woman's voice that just kept saying her name. And she turns and asks who it is, but she can't see who's calling her. So she sprints to her door, but before she can open it, something grabs her by the neck and disappears. And in the morning, Jacob gets a call from the police, and Sheriff Mike tells them that Amelia is missing, and Jacob tells him that he was going to her house today to talk to her mother, and that Amelia was worried about her. And the sheriff thinks that Amelia could have just skipped town, because living with an alcoholic single parent is pretty difficult. And later that night, Jacob and Anne were having dinner with Jacob's brother Bob and his wife Carol. And Carol thinks that Amelia just left with some boyfriend, and she's probably doing some kind of silly kid stuff. And apparently, Anne has been very dissatisfied with her life lately. She's not happy with her marriage and doesn't think that Jacob appreciates her anymore. And the next morning after that, Anne tells Jacob that her proposal for the gin mill went through and that she will be meeting with Tom Lowe, her ex-boyfriend, for lunch to talk about the design. And Jacob is not happy about this, cause who's happy about your wife seeing her ex? I mean, nobody's happy about that. But he doesn't say anything, he just tells her to say hi for him, and he just leaves for work. And Anne meets up with Tom and they have a good lunch, and they talk about the old times and they catch up. And Tom is pretty surprised that Anne married Jacob because when she was younger, she had so many plans to leave her hometown and just travel the world. And after lunch, they go to the gin mill to check it out, and when they get to the factory, Tom tells Anne that the reason he took this project was actually because of her. And then they look into each other's eyes and they start making out. And while they were making out, they hear a loud noise and they go down to check it out, and they see two boxes that have not been there before. And Tom is not really bothered by the boxes that just appeared out of nowhere, and he just wants to continue making out with Anne, and she suddenly stops him and tells him that she's still very attracted to him, but she can't do this to her husband Jacob. And before she can explain more, they hear a rumble coming from one of the boxes, and Tom opens it, and it's a big rat inside. And when he opens the second box, hundreds of rats jumped out and they started eating him immediately. And when Anne tried to run and get away, she gets caught by the same thing that got Amelia. And at home, Jacob was pretty worried because Anne is late and he called Bob to check if maybe Anne came to his house, but then he hears the door open and sees Anne. And he asks her where she was, and she tells him that she was just at the mill and she just wants to go to bed now because she's tired. And the next morning, when Anne was doing her workouts, she starts acting very weird and she looks in the mirror and she asks, "What are you and what do you want?" And when Jacob gets home, Anne tells him that she wants to go out tonight and they have dinner, but Anne doesn't seem to want to eat the food and she eats a little and stops. And the next day, Anne goes to a supermarket and she stops at the meat section and she tests the blood from one of the packages and buys only animal blood. I didn't even know you could do that, but apparently so. And after she got home, she starts drinking the blood with wine glass and she starts dancing to music. And she's also gotten very strong and she started picking up the sofa by herself and just moving it around. And all of a sudden, as she was dancing, she felt nauseated and she throws up all the blood that she drank. And then she goes to take a bath and we can see 2 bite marks on her neck. And when she touches it, she hears her name being called by the same woman's voice that called her before. And when she looks outside her window, she sees a lot of rats around her window, and she also sees in a distance the thing that has been calling her name. And meanwhile, Jacob has gone to Bob's house to talk about Anne, and he's worried that she's acting really strange lately. And this is happening after she met Tom, and Bob doesn't really think that Anne is cheating, but he tells Jacob to talk to Tom and to tell him to stay away from his wife. And the next day when she was gardening, Anne sees this worm and she eats it. It doesn't satisfy her, and then she goes to the dentist, and the dentist tells her that she's growing another tooth. And she tells her that it's rare but not unheard of. And for now, she actually needs a UV light teeth cleaning. And while sitting in the mouth cleaning machine, her mouth starts burning and turns black from the UV light, and she takes off the machine and she runs out to go to her house. And Jakob was actually tracking down Tom, and he goes to the mill and he finds two young adults that always annoy Jakob outside his church. One of them, Oscar, gets mad and he tells Jakob to go to hell and stuff, and Ellie, his girlfriend, tells him to leave the old man alone. And Oscar pushes down Jakob to the ground while trying to say that he was sorry to him. And Amelia jumps down from the top out of nowhere and she devours Oscar and drinks his blood. And there's like blood everywhere. And apparently, you guessed it, Amelia has become a vampire. And after she finishes Oscar, she tells Jakob that she found a new savior and her name was the Master. And she gives her strength instead of fear, and she also tells him that her master is actually in Jacob's house. And Jakob tries to push her away with the church's seal, and it works a little, but then she pushes him until Eli hits her in the back, and then they both make a run for it. And then Eli suggests that they should go to the police, but Jakob goes back to his house to see his wife. And back at his house, Anne was freaking out, and when the neighbor sees her from the window, he thinks that Anne might be having some kind of mental breakdown or a heart attack, and he runs over to help her. But when he got to her house, apparently she was a bloodthirsty vampire who was, well, bloodthirsty. And she cuts open his neck and she starts drinking his blood. But before she could finish, Jakob walks in the house and he sees her licking blood from the floor. And she tells him that it wasn't her and that she's possessed by a vampire. And she tells him what happened the day she met with Tom, and she also shows him her bite marks. And despite what he's seen, Jakob believes Anne and he starts cleaning the room to get rid of the blood. And their doorbell rings, and when he opens it, it's Sheriff Mike. And Mike tells him that a girl named Eli came to the police station and told him that a vampire killed her boyfriend and that she also said that Jakob was there. And when the sheriff tells this to Jakob, Jakob just denies it, and both of them joke that Eli must have been really high on drugs. And after the sheriff left, Jakob and Anne start talking, and he asks her why she didn't tell him when this all happened, because he could have helped her, and she tells him that she was just ashamed. And Jakob and Anne then take the dead body and they bury it in their backyard. And then they come up with a plan to kill the master and get Anne back to normal. And later that night, Jakob and Anne go to the mill to kill the master, and when they get there, they find Amelia again. And when Amelia starts getting close to Jakob to attack him, he sprays her with holy water, and she starts burning and screaming like all vampires do. And Anne grabs Amelia from the back, and she tells Jakob to kill her. And he refuses because he only wants to kill the master and save Amelia as well. But Anne doesn't listen to him, and she kills Amelia herself. And Jakob then leaves the mill and tells Anne that she brought this on herself and that she's now become a monster. So he decides to leave her there and he just goes home. But after he gets home, he couldn't sleep, so he goes back to get Anne, but the master was apparently waiting for him there. And she makes him hold a knife to his throat, and when Anne gets home, the master tells Anne that she has to choose to die or thrive, and cuts Jakob a little to entice Anne to eat her husband. And Jakob tries to fight Anne, but she overpowers him and she starts kissing him on the lips, and they do it. And the next few days, Anne's body was apparently dying out, and they have to kill the master fast or she will die if she doesn't get human blood, and time is running out. And Anne tells Jakob that all she thinks about is blood, and he tells her that he has this idea to make her relax, and then they both start smoking some weed. And this apparently works for them because it really calms Anne down. And while they were getting high, they get a call from a friend who tells them to check on their mom for them. But when they get there, they see that their friend's mom is actually dead. And Jakob sees this as some kind of blessing, so they take the body and put it in their trunks. And they take it home so that Anne can drink her blood. But when they were taking it home, one of their neighbors sees them through the window and calls the police on them. And Jakob leaves Anne with the body and starts driving to the mill to finally kill the master. But while going there, he gets stopped by Sheriff Mike, who sees all his killing tools, and he handcuffs him to take him back to the station. And Jakob tries to explain that there is a vampire out there, but they don't really believe him because that's just crazy. And meanwhile, since Bob hasn't seen Jakob this week, he and Carol decide on a surprise visit, but when they get to his home, they see Anne draining the blood of the woman, and they freak out and call the police. And when they called the police, they radio Sheriff Mike, and he hears it while he was driving Jakob to the station. So he turns around and he goes back to his house with Jakob. And Bob and Carol were waiting for the police, and Carol couldn't stand the blood, so she goes out to the garden. And when Bob and Anne find out, Anne tells him not to run there, but he doesn't listen to her and he goes out to find Carol, but she was already bitten. And before he could move, the master grabs Bob and kills him in front of Anne. And the master asks Anne what she wants. And Anne answers this by saying that she wants to live a bigger, better life. And the master, who looks like a rat on a human body, by the way, tells her if Anne takes her blood and turns to her, she will be able to control her own hunger and she will be able to live the life that she's always wanted. And at this point, Sheriff Mike and Jacob get home and the police start shooting their guns at the vampire, but she doesn't even feel it. And they try to move closer, but the dead neighbor's hand comes from the ground and grabs their leg. And the master tells Anne to make a decision and take her blood. But before Anne can take the master's blood, Jacob stabs the master in the back and with her own blood draws a cross on her head and she starts screaming and she burns. And at the end, she turns into a regular normal rat. And seeing all of this, Sheriff Mike decides, okay, Jacob, this is your domain. This is your thing. You could just fix it yourself. And he just decides to leave because he's just a cop. He's not a vampire hunter. Yeah. And Anne is not cured, by the way, and she doesn't want to be. And they promise to trust each other and just live as a couple who doesn't try to hurt each other. But since this is a horror movie, it ends with them both trying to kill each other. Yeah, that's how the movie comes to an end. I hope you guys enjoyed our recap. Remember to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel. I'll see you guys on the next recap. Bye.